The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains of Clarence's house, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. William sat in his father's study, watching as King Charles adjusted his tie for the third time. The silence between them had become comfortable over the years, but today it felt different. Today it carried the weight of unspoken truths. Charles cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding his son's gaze. "The arrangements for your mother's memorial garden dedication next week are nearly complete," he said quietly. "I thought you should know that Camilla has expressed some concerns about the media attention." William's jaw tightened slightly. 26 years had passed since Diana's death, yet the mention of memorial events still brought a familiar ache to his chest. He had learned to navigate these conversations carefully, understanding that his father's relationship with Camilla required delicate handling. But something in Charles's tone today suggested this was more than just logistical planning. "What kind of concerns?" William asked, his voice measured and diplomatic. Charles moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. The gesture reminded William of countless similar moments throughout his childhood, when difficult conversations were approached sideways, never head-on. "She feels that perhaps it's time to move forward more completely. That dwelling on the past doesn't serve anyone well." The words hung in the air like smoke. William felt his chest tighten, but years of royal training kept his expression neutral. He understood what his stepmother was really saying, even if his father couldn't bring himself to be direct about it. Catherine had always been his anchor in moments like these, her gentle wisdom helping him process the complex emotions that came with being Diana's son, in a world where his father had remarried. "I see," William replied simply, though his mind was racing. He thought of Catherine, probably at home with their children, her warm smile and understanding eyes. She had never tried to replace his mother's memory or compete with Diana's legacy. Instead, she had carved out her own space in the royal family with grace and authenticity that reminded him daily why he had fallen in love with her. Charles turned back to face his son, and for a moment, William saw something vulnerable in his father's expression. "You know I loved your mother," Charles said softly. "But Camilla is my wife now, and she's been remarkably patient with everything. Perhaps it's time we all found a way to honor the past without living in it." William nodded slowly, understanding the impossible position his father was in. The king was trying to balance respect for his first wife's memory with loyalty to his current wife, while navigating the expectations of a nation that had never fully embraced Camilla. It was a delicate dance that had been going on for decades, and William had learned to play his part without causing unnecessary friction. "Of course, Papa," William said, using the childhood name that still came naturally despite his adult status. "I'll speak with Catherine about adjusting our plans accordingly." The relief on Charles's face was immediate and telling. William realized that his father had been dreading this conversation, probably for days. The weight of crown and family expectations had always been heavy on Charles's shoulders, but it seemed to be growing heavier with each passing year. As William prepared to leave, Charles reached out and briefly touched his arm. "Your mother would be proud of the man you've become," he said quietly. "And Catherine, she's been a blessing to this family. Don't let anyone make you forget that." The words surprised William. It was rare for his father to be so direct about personal matters, and rarer still for him to acknowledge the subtle tensions that existed within their blended family. William nodded, understanding that this was Charles's way of apologizing for the difficult position he was often put in. Walking back to his car, William felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He thought about the memorial garden, about his mother's legacy, and about the delicate balance required to honor the past while building a future. Catherine would understand, of course. She always did. Her ability to see the bigger picture while maintaining her own integrity was one of the things he admired most about her. The drive home to Kensington Palace gave him time to process the conversation. He thought about Camilla's concerns and what they really meant. Behind the diplomatic language was a clear message. It was time to minimize Diana's continuing presence in royal life. William understood the reasoning, even if he didn't entirely agree with it. Camilla had spent decades living in Diana's shadow, and perhaps it was natural that she would want that shadow to grow smaller as the years passed. But as he pulled into his driveway and saw Catherine's car parked in its usual spot, William felt a surge of gratitude for the woman waiting inside. Unlike the complex dynamics he navigated with his stepmother, his relationship with Catherine was built on mutual respect and genuine love. She had never asked him to choose between honoring his mother's memory and building their future together. The house was quiet when he entered, but he could hear the soft murmur of Catherine's voice reading to their youngest. The sound filled him with a peace that had been absent during his conversation with his father. Here in this space they had created together, he didn't have to navigate competing loyalties or unspoken tensions. Here he could simply be a husband and father. Catherine looked up as he appeared in the doorway of the nursery, her smile immediate and welcoming. She didn't ask about his meeting with his father right away, but he could see the understanding in her eyes. She knew him well enough to read the subtle signs of stress he carried after difficult family conversations. Later that evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room, William would tell her about the memorial garden discussion and Camilla's concerns. Catherine would listen with her characteristic thoughtfulness, offering gentle insights that would help him find a path forward that honored both his mother's memory and his family's current reality. But for now, in this moment, he simply watched his wife read to their child and felt grateful for the stability she brought to his complicated world. The following morning brought an unexpected chill to London, despite the late spring season. Catherine stood in the conservatory of Kensington Palace, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea as she watched the rain streak down the glass panels. She had woken early, her mind still processing William's account of his conversation with King Charles the previous evening. The memorial garden situation was more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Catherine understood the delicate politics involved, but she also recognized the deeper emotional currents at play. William's relationship with his mother's memory was sacred to him, and any suggestion of diminishing Diana's legacy felt like a personal attack. Even when delivered with diplomatic courtesy, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see William approaching, already dressed for his morning appointments. His expression was thoughtful, the same look he wore when working through complex problems that had no easy solutions. "You're up early," he said softly, joining her at the window. "I couldn't sleep," Catherine admitted. "I keep thinking about what you told me last night, about Camilla's concerns." William sighed, his breath fogging the glass slightly. "I know she's not intentionally being cruel. She's protecting her own position, which I suppose is natural. But sometimes I feel like I'm being asked to choose between honoring my mother and keeping peace in the family." Catherine set down her teacup and turned to face him fully. Over the years, she had learned to navigate these sensitive family dynamics with careful consideration. Her approach had always been to support William while avoiding any actions that could be interpreted as taking sides in old conflicts. "Perhaps there's a middle path," she suggested gently. "What if we focus on making the memorial garden dedication more about your mother's charitable legacy, rather than personal remembrance? That way, it honors her work without feeling like we're dwelling on the past." William's eyes brightened slightly. This was exactly why he valued Catherine's perspective so deeply. She had a gift for finding solutions that satisfied multiple parties without compromising core principles. Her diplomatic skills had been honed through years of royal duties, but more importantly, they came from a genuine desire to bring harmony to difficult situations. "You're right," he said, reaching for her hand. "We could emphasize the children's charities, the hospital work. Make it about continuing her mission rather than memorializing her person." As they talked through the possibilities, Catherine noticed something she had been seeing more frequently in recent months. William seemed increasingly isolated within his own family. His relationship with his father was cordial but cautious, complicated by Charles's need to balance competing loyalties. His connection with Harry remained strained despite their shared loss. And Camilla, while never openly hostile, maintained a careful distance that spoke volumes. "William," Catherine said carefully, "I've been thinking that perhaps we should also consider hosting our own private remembrance, something separate from the official royal schedule. Just our family, maybe Harry if he's willing." The suggestion hung between them like a bridge across troubled waters. William's expression shifted as he considered the implications. A private ceremony would allow him to honor his mother in the way that felt most authentic to him, without the political complications that surrounded official royal events. "That's brilliant," he said after a moment. "We could do it at Althorpe where she's buried. Spencer would welcome us, I'm sure." Catherine nodded, already envisioning how such a gathering might unfold. It would be simple, personal, free from the constraints of royal protocol. More importantly, it would give William the space to grieve and remember, without worrying about how his emotions might be perceived or politicized. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their private secretary, who briefed them on the day's schedule. Catherine noted how William's demeanor shifted as they discussed official duties, his natural warmth becoming more formal and guarded. It was a transformation she had witnessed countless times, but lately, it seemed to require more effort from him. After the briefing, as William prepared to leave for his first appointment, Catherine caught his arm gently. "Remember what your mother always said about kindness," she reminded him. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose compassion, even when others choose calculation." William smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him that morning. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I know you," Catherine replied simply. "And I know that your mother's greatest gift to you wasn't just her love, but her ability to see the good in people, even in difficult circumstances." As William left for his duties, Catherine remained in the conservatory, her thoughts turning to the broader implications of the morning's conversation. She understood that Camilla's position was not enviable. Living in the shadow of a beloved first wife, especially one who had died tragically young, created pressures that few people could truly comprehend. At the same time, Catherine recognized that William's need to honor his mother's memory was not just sentimentality. It was a fundamental part of who he was as a person and as a future king. Diana's legacy of compassion and direct connection with people had shaped William's own approach to royal duty. To ask him to minimize that influence was to ask him to diminish a core part of his identity. The rain continued to fall against the conservatory windows, creating patterns that shifted and changed with each gust of wind. Catherine found herself thinking about the nature of memory and how it lived within families. Unlike objects that could be packed away or photographs that could be removed from walls, emotional legacies were harder to control or diminish. She thought about her own children and how they would remember this time in their lives. Would they recall the tensions and careful diplomacy? Or would they remember the love and stability that she and William worked so hard to maintain? The responsibility of shaping those memories felt enormous some days. Her phone buzzed with a text from her private secretary, reminding her of an upcoming engagement with a children's charity. As she prepared to leave, Catherine made a mental note to call Diana's brother later that week. If they were going to host a private remembrance at Althorpe, it would need to be arranged carefully and with respect for the Spencer family's own relationship with Diana's memory. Walking through the halls of Kensington Palace, Catherine passed the portrait gallery, where official royal photographs lined the walls. She paused for a moment at one particular image of Diana from the early 1980s, radiant and young, with an expression of hope that seemed almost prophetic now. "I'll take care of him," Catherine whispered to the portrait, a promise she had made silently many times before. "I'll make sure he remembers the best of you." The palace felt different on days like this, when family tensions hung in the air like an approaching storm. Catherine had learned to navigate these atmospheres with grace, but she never became immune to their effects. The weight of representing not just herself but an entire institution meant that every choice, every word, carried consequences that rippled far beyond personal relationships. As she prepared for her charity engagement, Catherine reminded herself of one of Diana's most famous quotes about kindness being a strength, not a weakness. Today she would need to embody that philosophy as she worked to build bridges in a family that sometimes seemed determined to build walls. 3 days later, William found himself in an unexpected confrontation that would change everything. He had arrived early at Clarence House for what was supposed to be a routine meeting about upcoming royal engagements. Instead, he discovered Camilla in Charles's study, speaking animatedly on the phone with someone about finally moving past old ghosts. She hadn't noticed his arrival, and William stood frozen in the doorway as her words became clearer. 26 years is long enough for this family to be defined by someone who's no longer here, Camilla was saying. Charles has been more than patient, but I think it's time we establish some boundaries about how much space we give to past relationships. The phrase, past relationships, hit William like a physical blow. His mother wasn't a past relationship to be managed or compartmentalized. She was the woman who had given her life meaning to royal duty, who had revolutionized how the monarchy connected with ordinary people, who had shaped him into the man he had become. Camilla finally noticed his presence and quickly ended her phone call. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with everything that couldn't be said directly. William's training in royal diplomacy warred with his instinct to defend his mother's memory, and for the first time in years, diplomacy lost. "I didn't realize my mother's legacy had become such an inconvenience," he said quietly, his voice carrying a chill that Camilla had never heard before. She straightened, her own defenses rising. "William, you misunderstood. I was simply discussing the practical aspects of royal scheduling. There are only so many memorial events the public can absorb, and we need to think strategically about the monarchy's image." "The monarchy's image," William repeated slowly. "Is that what my mother has become? An image problem?" The conversation spiraled from there, with years of carefully suppressed tensions finally erupting into the open. Camilla defended her position with increasing frustration, arguing that constantly honoring Diana made it impossible for her to establish her own identity as queen consort. William countered that erasing his mother's influence would fundamentally change what the monarchy meant to the British people. "She's been gone for over 2 decades, Camilla said finally, her voice rising. "At some point we need to stop living in her shadow and focus on the future." "She's not a shadow," William replied, his composure finally cracking. "She's the reason millions of people still believe in what this institution can be. And if you can't understand that, then maybe you don't understand what it means to be queen." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. William immediately regretted the harshness of his tone, but he couldn't take back what had been said. Camilla's face went pale, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt rather than defensive. Charles chose that moment to enter his study, immediately sensing the tension crackling between his wife and son. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he took in their confrontational stances and the obvious anger radiating from both of them. "What's going on here?" Charles asked carefully, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer. Neither William nor Camilla spoke immediately. The silence stretched uncomfortably until William finally turned to his father. "I think we need to have a very honest conversation about what kind of family we're trying to be," he said, "because right now I'm not sure I recognize it." Charles looked between his wife and son, understanding that he was being forced into exactly the kind of choice he had spent decades trying to avoid. The weight of his impossible position was visible in every line of his face. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to cool down," Charles suggested weakly. "These are emotional topics, and we're all feeling the strain of—" "No, Papa," William interrupted, using his childhood name for his father with deliberate emphasis. "I don't think cooling down is going to solve this. I think we need to decide what matters more, keeping everyone comfortable or standing by the principles that actually matter." William left Clarence House that afternoon with the knowledge that he had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. The careful balance that had existed in his family for years had been shattered, and he wasn't sure it could be repaired. More troubling was the realization that he wasn't sure he wanted it to be repaired, at least not on the same terms. Driving home, he found himself thinking about Catherine and how she would process what had happened. Her wisdom had guided him through countless difficult situations, but this felt different. This felt like a fundamental break that would require them to reconsider their entire approach to family relationships. Catherine was in the garden when he arrived home, playing with their children in the late afternoon sun. The sight of her natural grace and obvious joy in simple moments provided a stark contrast to the tension he had just left behind. Here was authenticity, while Clarence House had felt like a stage where everyone was playing roles that no longer fit. She looked up as he approached, and her smile faded immediately as she read his expression. "What happened?" she asked simply, her voice filled with concern. William sank into one of the garden chairs, suddenly feeling exhausted. "I think I may have just ended our relationship with Camilla," he said quietly, "and possibly complicated things with Papa beyond repair." Catherine sent the children inside with their nanny and sat down beside her husband. She didn't immediately ask for details or offer solutions. Instead, she simply took his hand and waited for him to be ready to talk. When he finally told her about the confrontation, Catherine listened without judgment. She asked clarifying questions when needed, but never criticized his choices or suggested he should have handled things differently. Her support was exactly what he needed in that moment. "Do you regret what you said?" she asked finally. William considered the question carefully. I regret how I said it, he admitted. But I don't regret standing up for Mummy's memory. I can't pretend anymore that it doesn't matter whether we honor what she represented. Catherine nodded slowly. Then we'll figure out how to move forward from here, she said simply. Together. That evening, as they sat in their private sitting room after the children were in bed, Catherine brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. William, I've been thinking about what you said this afternoon, about not recognizing your family anymore. He looked at her expectantly, knowing that whatever she was about to say would be important. I think maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, Catherine continued carefully. Sometimes we outgrow relationships that no longer serve who we're becoming. And maybe who you're becoming is someone who can't accept compromises on the things that matter most to you. Her words offered a perspective William hadn't considered. Perhaps the confrontation with Camilla wasn't a failure of diplomacy, but a necessary step toward authenticity. Perhaps some relationships were meant to evolve or even end when fundamental values could no longer be reconciled. As they talked late into the evening, William began to see a path forward that didn't require him to choose between family harmony and personal integrity. It would mean accepting that some relationships might become more distant, but it would also mean being true to the principles his mother had instilled in him. The silence between him and Catherine that night was comfortable and healing, filled with understanding rather than tension. It reminded him of why their marriage worked so well. They had built it on mutual respect and shared values rather than political convenience or family expectations. The aftermath of William's confrontation with Camilla created ripples throughout the royal household that neither he nor Catherine had fully anticipated. Within hours, palace staff were whispering about the heated discussion at Clarence House, and by the next morning Charles's private secretary had called to request an urgent meeting. Catherine watched her husband prepare for this follow-up conversation with growing concern. William had slept poorly, his mind clearly wrestling with the implications of what had happened. She could see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, in a way that went beyond normal royal duties. You don't have to carry this alone, she reminded him as he adjusted his tie in their bedroom mirror. Whatever happens today, we face it together. William met her eyes in the reflection. I keep thinking about what Mummy would want me to do, he said quietly. She always said that standing up for what's right is more important than keeping everyone happy. Then trust that instinct, Catherine replied. You know her better than anyone else in that room. The meeting at Clarence House was smaller than William had expected. Just himself, Charles, and Charles's most trusted advisor. Notably, Camilla was absent, which William took as either a sign of respect for the sensitivity of the conversation or an indication that she was too angry to participate constructively. Charles looked older than William remembered, the stress of the situation clearly taking its toll. They sat in the same study where the confrontation had occurred 2 days earlier, but the atmosphere was entirely different. Where there had been anger and defensiveness, there was now careful wariness. Son, Charles began, his voice carrying a formality that felt unnatural between them. I think we need to discuss how to move forward from this situation without causing lasting damage to family relationships. William recognized the diplomatic language immediately. This wasn't going to be a conversation about right and wrong, but about damage control and public perception. The realization disappointed him, though it didn't surprise him. Papa, with respect, I think we're beyond damage control, William replied. I think we need to have an honest conversation about what kind of family we want to be, and what kind of monarchy we want to represent. Charles's advisor shifted uncomfortably, clearly preferring the safer territory of political strategy to the messy realm of family dynamics. But William pressed on, knowing this might be his only opportunity to address the underlying issues. For years, we've all pretended that the tensions don't exist, William continued. We've made compromises and accommodations that have left everyone feeling like they can't be completely honest about what they need or believe. I don't think that's sustainable anymore. Charles was quiet for a long moment, and William could see him weighing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weariness that seemed to come from deep within him. Your mother was extraordinary, Charles said slowly, but she's been gone for over half your lifetime now. At some point, we need to consider whether constantly looking backward is preventing us from building something meaningful going forward. The words stung, even though William recognized they came from a place of genuine struggle rather than malice. His father was trying to balance impossible competing demands, honoring his first wife's memory while building a future with his second wife, maintaining family unity while dealing with fundamental disagreements about values and priorities. "I'm not asking anyone to live in the past," William said carefully, "but I am asking that we not pretend the past doesn't matter." Mummy's approach to royal duty changed what this institution means to people. If we abandon that, we abandon something essential about who we're supposed to be. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Charles and his advisor proposing various compromises, and William holding firm on his core principles. It became clear that they were discussing more than just memorial events or public schedules. They were negotiating the future direction of the monarchy itself. Finally, Charles's advisor suggested a solution that surprised everyone in the room. "Perhaps Prince William should consider developing his own distinct charitable and public portfolio," he said carefully. "Something that allows him to honor his mother's legacy, while also establishing his own identity as a future king." The suggestion hung in the air like a lifeline. William could see the appeal immediately. It would give him the freedom to operate according to his own values, while reducing the direct conflict with Camilla's position. More importantly, it would allow him to build something positive rather than simply fighting against what he opposed. "That could work," William said slowly, "but it would need to be genuinely independent, not subject to the same political calculations that seem to drive everything else." Charles nodded, and William could see relief in his father's expression. The solution offered a path forward that didn't require anyone to admit they were wrong, or to fundamentally change their positions. It was, William realized, a very royal way of handling an impossible situation. The drive back to Kensington Palace gave William time to process what had been decided. He felt simultaneously relieved and unsettled. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the underlying tensions remained unchanged. He would have more freedom to operate according to his own principles, but at the cost of deeper integration with his family's shared mission. Catherine was waiting for him in their private sitting room, her expression hopeful but cautious. "How did it go?" she asked as he settled beside her on the sofa. "Better than I expected, actually," William replied, then explained the proposed solution. Catherine listened thoughtfully, asking questions that helped him think through the implications. "It sounds like you'll have the space to do meaningful work," she said finally. "But will you feel isolated from the rest of the family?" It was exactly the right question, and William appreciated that Catherine had identified the emotional cost of the arrangement so quickly. "Probably," he admitted, "but maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe some distance will allow for more honest relationships in the long run." As they talked through the details, Catherine brought up practical considerations that hadn't been discussed in the meeting. How would this arrangement affect their children's relationship with their grandfather and step-grandmother? What would it mean for future family gatherings and public appearances? "We'll need to be very intentional about maintaining connections where they matter," Catherine said. "Especially for the children. They shouldn't pay the price for adult disagreements." William nodded, recognizing once again why Catherine's perspective was so valuable. She had a gift for seeing the human impact of political decisions, and for finding ways to protect what mattered most even in difficult circumstances. That evening, as they sat together after the children were in bed, William found himself thinking about his mother's famous interview, where she had talked about wanting to be a queen of hearts rather than a traditional royal figure. At the time, her words had seemed like a challenge to the existing order. Now he wondered if they had actually been a prediction of how the monarchy would need to evolve. "Catherine," he said quietly, "do you think Mummy would approve of what we're doing?" Catherine considered the question seriously before answering. "I think she would approve of you standing up for what you believe in," she said. "And I think she would be proud that you're not willing to compromise your principles for the sake of keeping everyone comfortable." The silence that followed was peaceful rather than tense. William felt for the first time in days that he was moving in the right direction. The path forward wouldn't be easy, and it would require careful navigation of complex family dynamics. But at least he would be walking it with integrity intact and with Catherine by his side. 6 months after the confrontation that changed everything, William stood in the gardens of Kensington Palace watching Catherine play with their children. The autumn light cast golden shadows across the lawn, and for the first time in years, he felt completely at peace with the choices they had made. The independent charitable foundation he had established was already making a significant impact. Free from the political constraints that had limited his previous work, William had been able to tackle issues that mattered deeply to him: mental health support for young people, environmental conservation, and homelessness prevention. The work felt authentic in a way that royal duties hadn't for a long time. Catherine had been instrumental in shaping the foundation's approach. Her background in art history had given her unexpected insights into how visual storytelling could change public perception of complex social issues. Together, they had created something that honored Diana's legacy while establishing their own distinct voice in public service. "Papa's coming for tea today," Catherine called to him from across the garden. "Are you ready for that?" William nodded, though he felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied visits from his father. Their relationship had evolved since the confrontation with Camilla, becoming more formal but also, paradoxically, more honest. They spoke less frequently but with greater authenticity when they did connect. Charles arrived precisely on time, as always, but his demeanor was different than it had been in recent months. There was something lighter about him, as if a burden had been lifted. He embraced William warmly and spent genuine time playing with his grandchildren before they settled into adult conversation. "I have some news," Charles said as they sat in the conservatory where Catherine had first processed the Memorial Garden controversy. "Camilla and I have decided to step back from some of our public duties. We want to focus on the causes that matter most to us rather than trying to be everything to everyone." William felt a mixture of surprise and recognition. His father's decision seemed to echo the same desire for authenticity that had driven William's own choices. "How do you feel about that?" William asked carefully. "Relieved, actually," Charles admitted. "I think we've all been trying too hard to fit into roles that don't quite work anymore. Your decision to create your own path gave me permission to consider alternatives I hadn't thought possible." The conversation that followed was the most honest they had shared in years. Charles spoke openly about the pressure he had felt to balance competing loyalties, and William acknowledged the impossible position his confrontation with Camilla had created. For the first time, they were able to discuss their family dynamics without the careful diplomacy that had characterized their relationship for so long. "I owe you an apology," Charles said eventually. "I should have found a way to support your need to honor your mother's memory, without making you feel like you had to choose between family harmony and personal integrity." William was quiet for a moment, processing words he had never expected to hear from his father. "You were trying to hold everything together," he replied finally. "I understand that now in a way I didn't before." Catherine joined them for tea, and William watched as she navigated the conversation with her characteristic grace. She asked thoughtful questions about Charles's plans and shared updates about their foundation's work, creating a bridge between past tensions and future possibilities. As the afternoon progressed, William noticed something significant happening. Without the pressure to maintain artificial harmony, his relationship with his father was becoming more genuine. They could disagree on things without it threatening their fundamental connection, and they could support each other's choices without requiring complete agreement. "I spoke with Camilla this morning," Charles said as he prepared to leave. "She asked me to tell you that she regrets how things escalated between you. She doesn't expect forgiveness, but she wanted you to know that she understands your position better now." William nodded, appreciating the gesture even if he wasn't ready to fully trust it. The wounds from their confrontation were still too fresh, and too much had been said to simply return to the way things had been. But perhaps with time and space they could find a way to coexist respectfully. That evening, as William and Catherine sat together in their sitting room, she brought up something that had been on her mind throughout the day. "I've been thinking about your mother's famous quote about there being 3 people in her marriage," she said carefully. "I wonder if, in a way, there have been 3 people in our family's relationships too." William looked at her questioningly, not immediately understanding her meaning. "I mean that Diana's memory has been a presence in every family interaction for years," Catherine explained. "Not because anyone intended it that way, but because no one knew how to acknowledge her influence without making others feel threatened or diminished." The insight struck William as profoundly true. His mother's legacy had indeed been like a third person in family conversations, sometimes welcomed and sometimes resented, but never openly discussed in a way that allowed everyone to find peace with her continuing influence. Maybe that's changing now, he said thoughtfully. Maybe creating space for different approaches to honoring the past will allow everyone to be more comfortable with their own relationships to Mummy's memory. Catherine smiled. I think your mother would appreciate that, she said. She always believed that people should be free to be authentic, even when that made things more complicated. As they prepared for bed, William found himself thinking about the unexpected turns his life had taken in recent months. The confrontation that had felt like a crisis at the time had actually created opportunities for growth and authentic relationship that wouldn't have been possible. Otherwise, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unexpected source. Harry, his brother, who had been largely absent from family gatherings for years, was requesting a private meeting to discuss the possibility of collaborative work on mental health initiatives. William showed the message to Catherine, who smiled with genuine pleasure. It seems like everyone is finding their way toward more honest relationships, she observed. Do you think this is what Mummy meant when she talked about the monarchy needing to modernize? William asked as they turned off the lights. I think she meant that the institution needed to serve people rather than expecting people to serve it, Catherine replied softly. And I think what you've built with the foundation does exactly that. William pulled her closer, feeling grateful for her unwavering support and wisdom. The silence between them was comfortable and full of possibility. Outside, London continued its ancient rhythm, but inside Kensington Palace something new was beginning to take shape. Catherine, he said quietly into the darkness, thank you for helping me find my way back to what matters. We found our way together, she corrected gently, just like your parents should have been able to do, if circumstances had been different. As sleep finally came, William realized that the confrontation with Camilla, painful as it had been, had ultimately freed him to become the person and leader he was meant to be. Sometimes, he thought drowsily, the most loving thing you can do is refuse to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. The foundation would continue to grow. His relationship with his father would continue to evolve, and hopefully, his family would find new ways to honor both the past and the present. But tonight, surrounded by the peace of authentic relationships and meaningful work, William felt closer to his mother's spirit than he had in years. The memorial garden that had started the whole controversy would open the following spring, but now it would represent something different than originally planned. Instead of being a source of tension between competing loyalties, it would stand as a testament to the possibility of honoring the past while building something new. Diana's legacy would live on not in careful political calculations, but in the authentic commitment to service that she had modeled and that her son now carried forward in his own way. 1 year later, William stood before the newly completed memorial garden as autumn leaves drifted down around him. The space had been transformed into something more beautiful than he had originally envisioned. Instead of a formal royal memorial, it had become a living tribute to compassion and service that welcomed visitors from all walks of life. Catherine stood beside him, their hands intertwined, as they watched families explore the interactive exhibits that told the story of charitable work spanning generations. Children laughed as they participated in activities designed to teach empathy and community service, while their parents read displays about the ongoing work of the foundation that bore Diana's name and carried forward her mission. She would have loved this, William said quietly, watching a group of teenagers from a local youth program plant flowers in the section dedicated to mental health awareness. She would have loved that it's helping people, Catherine agreed, not just remembering the past, but building the future. The past year had brought changes that none of them could have predicted. William's foundation had grown beyond his wildest expectations, attracting support from across the political spectrum and around the world. More importantly, it had given him a sense of purpose that felt genuinely connected to his mother's legacy, while being entirely his own creation. His relationship with Charles had continued to evolve, becoming deeper but less frequent. They met monthly for private dinners that had become opportunities for honest conversation about everything from parenting to the future of the monarchy. The careful diplomacy of their previous interactions had been replaced by genuine respect for their differences and appreciation for their shared values. Most surprisingly, Camilla had reached out 3 months earlier to request a private meeting. The conversation had been awkward at first, but ultimately healing. She had acknowledged that her concerns about Diana's continuing influence had come from her own insecurities rather than any real threat to the monarchy's future. More importantly, she had expressed genuine admiration for the work William was doing and had offered to support it in whatever way felt appropriate to him. "I never understood what she meant to people," Camilla had admitted during that difficult but important conversation. "I was so focused on establishing my own place that I couldn't see how honoring her legacy actually strengthens what we're all trying to build." The memorial garden opening had become an unexpected family reunion. Harry had flown in from California with his family, and for the first time in years the brothers had worked together on something meaningful. Their collaboration on the mental health exhibits had reminded them both of what they shared beyond their public differences. As the afternoon progressed, William found himself in conversation with visitors who shared their own stories of loss and resilience. An elderly woman told him about her daughter's struggle with mental illness and how the Foundation's resources had provided crucial support during the darkest moments. A young man described how the environmental programs had inspired him to change careers and work in conservation. These were the moments that reminded William why he had fought so hard to maintain his authentic connection to his mother's mission. The work wasn't about political positioning or family dynamics. It was about real people facing real challenges and finding the support they needed to overcome them. Catherine moved through the crowd with natural ease, her warmth and genuine interest in people's stories creating the same kind of connection that had made Diana so beloved. William watched her interact with a group of military families and felt a surge of gratitude for the woman who had stood by him through the most difficult period of his adult life. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the last visitors departed, the family gathered privately in the section of the garden dedicated to continuing charitable work. Charles spoke briefly about the importance of service across generations, while Camilla quietly placed flowers at the base of the fountain that anchored the memorial space. Harry pulled William aside as the group began to disperse. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "When you first told me about the confrontation with Camilla, I thought you were being unnecessarily difficult. I couldn't understand why you wouldn't just go along to get along." William waited, knowing his brother well enough to recognize that more was coming. "But watching what you've built this year," Harry continued, "I realize you were fighting for something I had given up on. You were insisting that our values actually matter, not just our public image. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had." The conversation between the brothers continued as they walked through the garden together, their children running ahead of them on the pathways. For the first time in years, they spoke openly about their mother's death, their different ways of processing grief, and their hopes for the future. "Do you think she would be proud of what we've become?" Harry asked as they paused at a bench overlooking the section dedicated to international humanitarian work. William considered the question seriously. "I think she would be proud that we're still fighting for what matters to us," he said finally. "Even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." As evening approached and the family prepared to leave, Catherine found William standing alone in the center of the memorial space. The silence around them was profound, filled not with tension or unspoken conflict, but with peace and possibility. "Are you ready to go home?" she asked softly. William nodded, but first he had something he needed to do. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a letter he had written to his mother the night before. It was something he had done periodically over the years, a way of processing his thoughts and maintaining his connection to her memory. The letter spoke of the year that had passed, the relationships that had been healed, and the work that lay ahead. Most importantly, it expressed his gratitude for the lessons she had taught him about standing up for what mattered, even when the cost was high. He placed the letter at the base of the memorial fountain, where it would eventually become part of the garden's living history. As he straightened, Catherine slipped her hand into his. "She's still with us," Catherine said simply, not as a source of conflict or political complication, but as the best of what we can be. Walking back toward their car, William felt a completeness he hadn't experienced in years. The silence that had once been filled with unspoken tensions and careful diplomacy had been transformed into something rich with understanding and authentic connection. The memorial garden would continue to welcome visitors. The foundation would continue to grow, and his family would continue to navigate the complex balance between tradition and progress. But now all of these things would happen in the context of relationships built on honesty, rather than convenience. As they drove home through the London streets, Catherine reached over and took his hand. "Your mother's greatest gift to you wasn't just her love," she said quietly. "It was her example of how to love others authentically, even when it's complicated." William squeezed her hand, understanding that Catherine had just articulated something he had been trying to grasp for months. Diana's legacy wasn't about preserving her memory in amber, but about carrying forward her commitment to genuine human connection and service. The silence that filled their car as they headed home was the most peaceful William had experienced in years. It was the silence of people who had found their way back to what mattered most: authentic love, meaningful work, and the courage to be true to their deepest values regardless of the cost. At Kensington Palace, their children were waiting with excited stories about the day's events and questions about when they could visit the memorial garden again. As William and Catherine listened to their animated chatter, they exchanged a look that spoke volumes about the future they were building together. That night, as he had every night for the past year, William felt genuinely grateful for the confrontation that had seemed so devastating at the time. Sometimes, he had learned, the most important conversations are the ones that feel impossible to have. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give to those you love is the truth, even when it's difficult to hear. The silence in their bedroom that night was full of possibility, unmarked by the tension and careful calculations that had characterized so much of their family life in previous years. Diana's memory would always be part of their story, but now it was woven into their present in a way that strengthened rather than complicated their relationships with each other and with the work they had been called to do.